What's up, guys? It's John from Outlier. I believe we're live. Max, what's going on, man? Anticipation is killing me. Yeah, me too. I actually just went live on Facebook for the first time. Actually, I think I did a Facebook live video like 4 years ago, or whenever we first released the very first edition of the dictionary. But I think I did it from my cell phone in my apartment. I didn't have a nice setup like this. Um, Let's see. Oh, people are commenting on the Facebook. Yeah, so the Facebook thing I did just before this, and it was like quick, like 20-minute, just kind of hangout chat. I talked about a couple things, which I'll talk about the same stuff right now, actually, because as always, the first few minutes is people are showing up, and so I don't want to get into the main topic just yet. But while we're waiting for people to show up, um, two things I guess I wanted to talk about. One, and I talked about both of these on the Facebook Live, so you guys that were there, just bear with me for a second, and we'll get into the main content. Um, One is yesterday I talked to Daniel from Hack Chinese. Now, this isn't Hacking Chinese, the blog by Ula Ling, who's another friend of ours. This is hackchinese.com, and again, I'm not affiliated with them. We're not like getting paid to say this or anything. It was just we Skyped yesterday. He showed me their product, and it was awesome. I mean, like I was so impressed with this thing. It's basically it's a vocabulary spaced repetition system. Um, but it's like it's exactly what you would want it to be, at least from my perspective. I used to get frustrated with Anki because it's just so much, and unless you're using a pre-made deck and not making any changes to it, like if you're making your own stuff, it's just so much work and so much like learning curve to get everything to work right. That I stopped using Anki while I was in Taiwan. I switched over completely to Plico flashcards because it was just so much more streamlined. You could look up a word in the dictionary, click the plus button, and it gets added to your deck. Um, Hack Chinese goes a step further. They have textbook lists where so any popular textbook, and I don't know how many they had, but it was a few dozen, I think. Um, any popular textbook that you're studying, you can just add it to your flashcard deck, and it'll feed you those new words as you go. You can choose how long you want to study, so you can say like I want to do a 10-minute flashcard session right now, and it'll queue up enough cards to keep you busy for 10 minutes based on the words that you're getting close to forgetting, and new words, um, and it keeps track of everything on the back end. So like say that one of the words in the chapter that you're studying, say one of you already know one of the words, it actually knows that you already know it because you've seen it before on their platform. And so it'll skip over that and not treat it as a new word. So it's just it's a really smart, well done, very slick system. And so I definitely recommend checking it out. It is paid. It's something like $8 a month if you get an annual subscription, and $12 if you pay month to month. But if I were like, if it were me back in Taiwan and I had access to that, I think I would get it. And again, it's not an affiliate. We're not getting paid to say that. It's just, I was super impressed with what they've built. So I definitely recommend checking it out. hackchinese.com. Ah, we have a Hack Chinese user. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was super impressed. So, Pascal, hey, how's it going, man? Is this the Pascal who's taken our course and I think lived in Hong Kong for a while? Is that you? Um, Carl, how's it going? Yeah, we've got a decent number of people here live. That's great. Um, so the other thing I wanted to talk about while we're still waiting for people to show up um, is some of you will know, um, the ones of you who like kind of get into the details of our research and read some of this stuff yourself, that Jishu Sheng is he was Ash's professor. I've met him a few times. I met him at a conference and a few other times, but he's one of the top paleographers in the world, and so we use his book. Let's see, 说文新政. Um, we use it a lot. Like pretty much anytime we're doing a research for a character, if there's an entry in this book, I pretty much always read it first. So it's just he does a really great job. The research is very detailed, and he's just a very careful scholar. So he actually, so what I want to talk about is he released a new book. I don't know, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I'm not sure, but I just got it. I ordered it recently from books.com.tw, or 博客来as it's called in Chinese, and it just came in a few days ago. 常用汉字. This is like, it's somewhat of a similar format. I'm gonna pull my camera up so you guys can, or my phone camera. So you can see it's kind of similar. So the big book, the 说文新政, you can see their explanations can be very long and detailed, which is great for us. It's aimed at academics, so it's meant to be that way. The explanations in this new book, 常用汉字, are shorter. They're aimed at a general audience instead of specialists, so they're a little easier to grasp if you don't have the academic background. And they also go all the way up to the modern character, and as you can see, even the simplified character. So, I think I've lost my camera. Oh, there we go. It's back. You know what it is? It's that I gotta get an AC adapter for this camera. I haven't gotten it yet. The battery's dead. I'll change it in a minute, but for now I'll be on the webcam. Let's see if I can get this to come back up. There we go. So, like I was saying, he goes all the way up to the simplified character, even when there is one. So, it's a really useful book. If you can read Chinese and if you're interested in this stuff, I definitely recommend getting it. Even if you don't have, academic background in this field, it's still, it's going to be really informative, and it's very interesting. It covers 1,099 characters. So, definitely recommend checking that out. And let me get up and change the battery pack real quick, and I'll be right back, guys, and we'll get into the main topic. All right, guys, I think that should be working. Sorry about that. I'm going to get an AC adapter before we do the next live stream, so that won't happen anymore. Let me just make sure everything's set up correctly. All right. Looks like we're all right. Hack Chinese. Does Hack Chinese use quality audio? I haven't actually checked out the audio, but we have someone else. The audio is TTS. So, okay, so that's a bit of a drawback. But to use as a reference for learning vocabulary, I think it's probably not that big of a deal, as long as you're not, making a point of imitating that audio. And yeah, 常用汉字, that's the title of the book I was just talking about. There we go, 常用汉字. Okay, so today's topic, what it's like to study Chinese in Taiwan. Let me pull up my notes here just to make sure that I don't ramble too much, as you guys know that I tend to do sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about, basically, I studied at the Mandarin Training Center, MTC. So that's mostly going to be what I'm talking about, but most of what I'm going to say is going to be applicable to other Chinese schools in Taiwan. Like, The exception would be like ICLP. It's its own thing. It's a, kind of a special program. Or things like privately owned schools that are, not run by universities. Some of those may be a little different, but they'll probably be fairly similar too. But most of the university programs, the university language programs for foreigners, um, are pretty much all similar experiences. So while I will be talking about the MTC, it's mostly going to be applicable to other stuff too. And there's plenty of reasons to not go to the MTC. Like I knew people that were at MTC, but they had jobs also, and so the pace at MTC was just too fast for them. So they, preferred to go to some of the other schools that take it a little bit slower pace. Um, or things like cost. There are some schools that are a little less expensive than MTC or location. Like, I mean, MTC is located in the middle of Da'an district in Taipei. But if you live out on the outskirts of town, or you prefer not to live in Taipei, you will live in another part of the country. There's plenty of other programs. The MTC is the biggest one. So it's when I was there, there was like 2,000 students enrolled, and it was bigger by far than any other of the university Chinese language programs. And so what that means is when you get to like the upper intermediate and advanced levels, you have more choices at MTC than you're going to have at most of the smaller schools, just because they don't have the students to support, doing a lot of variety at those levels. So yeah, there's plenty of reasons to go somewhere else besides MTC, but like I said, I went to MTC, so that's basically what I'm going to be focusing on. So, like I said, it's in Da'an district. It's on the Heping Donglu, which Heping Road or Heping East Road, or as it's spelled a lot of places in like an older romanization system, they spell it Hoping. So a lot of people that don't know the pronunciation in Chinese, like foreigners that live there that don't speak Chinese, some of them will call it Hoping Road, but it's Heping. It's part of National Taiwan Normal University, which is 国立台湾师范大学. It was founded in 1956, and I found this out yesterday. I didn't know John Huntsman, who was the U.S. ambassador to Singapore in the 90s and to China about 10 years ago. He was an alumni. He went to the MTC. Kevin Rudd, if we have any Aussies here on the live stream, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, he went to the MTC also. And I found this out today. Ryutaro Hashimoto. And sorry guys, my Japanese is not that good, so I'm probably butchering the pitch accent and whatnot, but he is the former Japanese prime minister. He was prime minister in the 90s of Japan. Apparently he also went to the MTC. There's also a bunch of sinologists and translators and journalists and, different people like that as well. So it's been around a long time. There's been a lot of, I guess, notable alumni that have graduated from there, have gone there. I think it used to be in a different building up until like the 90s, but now it's in the Boai building on campus, which is directly across from the library. So the door to the MTC building and the door to the library are about, 15 meters apart. There's other departments in that same building. There's like the translation department on the 10th floor, if I remember correctly. And there's like the French and Italian literature department in the same building, and I think maybe one or two others. Oh, and the translation is on a different floor. 10th floor, I think, is the teaching Chinese as a foreign language, which is where Ash used to be before he transferred to the Chinese department. And so that's how we met each other. There's some picnic tables outside the building, which I'll get to that when I talk about, social life and whatnot. But I was sitting out there studying one day at the picnic tables, and Ash was talking to some of my friends from MTC, and they introduced me to him, and we kind of hit it off after that. Okay, so application process. It's probably changed since I went there. Like I first started at the MTC 10 years ago. So I was probably applying, I guess, about 11 years ago. I'm sure the application process is different than it used to be. when I applied, it was like just a sheet of paper you had to fill out. You had to talk about your experience studying Chinese, if you have any, what textbooks you've used, what other resources you've used. It's pretty straightforward, simple application. Um, when I applied for scholarships, it was a little more in depth. So I applied for the Huayu Enrichment Scholarship. Let me see if I can get that to come up. Yeah. Okay, so and it switched to my webcam. I'm going to figure this streaming software out so it's not switching back and forth constantly. But anyway, the Huayu Enrichment Scholarship. Oh, if I can spell. So this is it's a Taiwanese government scholarship. I forget exactly how much it is per year, and it's probably different now than it was then. But it basically covers all of your tuition, unless you're at someplace expensive like MTC. Covers all your tuition at the school you go to, and you a little bit on top of that. So probably like maybe basic living expenses and some people lived in the dorm. I was married at the time, so I lived with my then wife. Yeah, I had a classmate that lived in the dorm, and he basically lived on the scholarship. He had a dorm room at the university. He had his classes paid for, and he had enough for like basic meals and stuff. A lot of people work on the side. A lot of people work full time. So, there's different ways of funding it. And then there's also scholarships at the MTC itself. So, like I said, this one, Huayu Enrichment, is a Taiwanese government scholarship. It's through the Ministry of Education. But there's also ones at MTC that you can apply for. I think some of them you can only apply for after you've been there for one semester. But if you need extra, oh, we have Mason 2,500 or 25,000 a month. Okay. Oh, I think I'm covering that up. Okay. So 25,000 NT a month. That's a little less than 1,000 US dollars. That's not bad. I don't think it was that high when I was there. Because I think, if I remember right, tuition is like around $1,000 US or a little bit more at MTC per semester. So like per 3 months, per quarter. So yeah, I guess maybe it is livable. I mean, you're not going to be like, you know, living large and going out all the time and whatnot on a scholarship like that, but it is probably doable. Well, like I said, there's other means of income available, one-on-one tutoring and stuff like that. So, um, let's see. Let me get rid of this. Go back to our normal. There we go. Okay, so once you're accepted and the whole visa application, I won't talk about the visa process because that changes all the time anywhere you go. There are people at MTC that can help you out with it, that have, more information, can tell you exactly what you need to do. One thing I did want to say, the Huayu Enrichment Scholarship, you have to apply well in advance, and you also need letters of recommendation. So I had one of my former professors from college write me a letter of recommendation. He was an art historian, and then a relative. Let's see, I applied for that some time ago. When I told them I had no references, no work experience, they banned the application and cut off contact. Is that for the Huayu scholarship? That seems weird. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's been 10 years since I did this, so things probably change constantly. Policies change and whatnot. So there is usually on Chinese forums, there's a thread most years about like applying for the Huayu Enrichment Scholarship. So it may be worth checking that out. Maybe read through past years. And there's also, I'll link this in the YouTube video, like down in the description. There's a thread that I wrote on Chinese forums like maybe a year after I started at MTC, I think. talking about my experience, and the thread kept going for years, and they kept up with all the changes. So you can get more, up to date information from this thread, which I'll add the link, after the video is over. But excuse me. So once you're there and you're set up, I arrived, I think, 2 weeks before classes started, if I remember correctly. That gives you time to find an apartment and get settled in and kind of get used to how to get around town and get your visa stuff taken care of and whatnot. Placement exam, I think the placement exam is like a week before classes start, and you basically go, you pay your tuition. I think you pay your tuition first, if I remember right. And then you have like a one-on-one conversation with a teacher. So they kind of know your study history. They know what what textbooks you've done, and so they kind of have an idea of where you are. And they'll just sit down and they'll just ask you a few questions, and then based on your ability to answer the questions, to understand the questions, they will place you in a level. And they're pretty good at it. I mean, I felt like the level that they put me in, initially I felt like it was too low, because I had memorized a bunch of extra characters, beyond what they knew at that level. And I knew a bunch of vocabulary beyond what they covered at that level, but I wasn't able to use it in conversation. So they place you kind of based on everything. I think they have some written questions too that you have to answer. Oh yeah, there was a computer test. So you take a quick test on the computer after you have your conversation, but I think they basically mostly place you based on your ability to converse. And so even though I felt like I was low, or like they placed me low, after a couple weeks, I realized, no, this is exactly where I need to be, because obviously I have a similar level of conversational ability as everyone else in the class. So, yeah, they did a pretty good job with placement. And then, yeah, once you've done your placement test, it's a few days later you get the results. They tell you what class you're going to be in. And they basically post it up. They may email you now, but at the time they posted it up on a bulletin board at the school. So you had your student number, you go and you find yourself on the piece of paper on the wall, and it tells you what class you're in, what textbook you need to buy, who your teacher is, and which classroom number, you need to be in at what time. So, and you choose, I talked about this a little bit last week in the textbooks video, but you choose either regular classes or intensive classes. And the difference is intensive is 1 extra hour of class time per day. And yeah, you basically, you show up for your first day, you sit down, and it's 2 to 3 hours of nonstop talking in Chinese, reading your book. And for me, who I had never had a conversation in Chinese before, getting on the plane to go to Taiwan. I had been studying for a while, but had never actually had like a real conversation with anybody. That first day was absolutely exhausting. Like sitting there and talking for 3 hours in Chinese, and in what Chinese that I knew at the time, was super draining. But you get used to it really quickly. By the end of the first week, it was fairly comfortable. And the teacher, my first teacher, was awesome. And now here's the thing. This is another point in favor of the MTC, because there's so many students there. They have a ton of teachers. So especially at the lower levels, the beginning and lower intermediate levels, there's probably going to be multiple teachers teaching the exact same book at the exact same level. So I started in book 2, lesson 4 or something like that. And there were other teachers teaching classes that also started from book 2, lesson 4. So if I didn't like that teacher, they would have allowed me to switch to another one. My first teacher was wonderful. She was probably one of the best teachers I had while I was there. Second semester, however, I got to the class on the first day, and everyone in the class had that teacher the first semester. Not my teacher from first semester, but the teacher in my second semester. Everyone had been with her at least one semester before that, Some of them had been with her for 2 semesters. So they all knew her, and it was like I felt like the outsider. And then I made a mistake. I don't even remember what the mistake was, but I made a mistake, and the teacher corrected me, and I kind of went like, okay. And then she like corrected me again, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I got it. And she corrected me again, and I understand the algae. And it made me super uncomfortable. And I figured out later she was wanting me to repeat it back to her. But it was just like I just it was a bad experience for me. So I went, I think immediately after that class, to the office and asked to switch, and they put me in a different class at the same level. And the teacher, that they put me in was awesome. We still keep in touch actually. So, 段老师. Um, so there is that benefit at MTC if the teacher is not a good fit for you, or if you just, even if you need it at a different time or whatever, like they can work with you. They can be a little flexible. When you get to the higher levels, it's a little more difficult, but that's the only teacher that I ever, wanted to switch from. So, um, let's see. We've got some comments. Um, yeah. So hack Chinese. Um, I would say like, um, I've already spent some time talking about it. So go back to the beginning of the video once this is over, and you'll be able to see me talk a little bit more about it. But yeah, it's a pretty awesome tool. I saw from your bio you were studying music prior to going to Taiwan. After a decade of living on the mainland, I've observed that Laowai with musical ability are good at getting traction fast. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think I know why it is. When I studied music, we had to take a series of classes called ear training. Um, and it's where, like, well, you train your ears to be able to hear, chords and intervals and whatnot, and to just become very sensitive to the music you're hearing. So you learn to listen very closely. And it's not just chords and harmony and stuff, it's also rhythm and whatnot. So I think a lot of musicians, especially who have that like university level training in music, are able to apply those ear training skills to language learning. I've noticed the same thing. Like I've talked to a lot of people that went to my school actually that are now in the language learning space. Um, you just you can apply that ear training to learning the sounds, the consonants and vowels, and the intonation and rhythm. Um, but you can learn that even if you're not a musician. Like I teach that in our pronunciation and accent masterclass. So I teach a lot of techniques. Actually, some of the techniques and some of my ways of doing the techniques, such as like chorusing, uh, the way that I teach to like start from rhythm and then layer on intonation, and then only after you have the rhythm and intonation, then you add the consonants and vowels. That came from my ear training and sight reading classes in music school. Sight reading, especially, if you had to sit down and sight read a piece of music, it helps to only look at the rhythm first, and then once you have the handle on the rhythm, then to go back and think about like the notes, and then you can sit down and play it, and you'll be able to do it pretty accurately. So I applied that same thing to like my approach to chorusing. Um, the difference between Old Chinese and Simplified Chinese. They're not, I mean, it's apples and oranges. I think you mean traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. Um, so traditional, it's going to have to be another video. Today's topic is what it's like to study in Taiwan. But if you're talking about Old Chinese, that's the pronunciation of the Chinese language as of like 2,500 years ago. Traditional Chinese is, the traditional Chinese characters, and then they were simplified in the 50s. But yeah, that's actually a good video topic. So that's one we want to do is talking about simplification. And we're also probably next week we're going to do one about Old and Middle Chinese, and I'm going to get Ash to come in on that one. So yeah, that should be pretty interesting. And we'll probably go back to Wednesday next week. I mean, Wednesday Japan time. I know it's still Wednesday in the U.S., but we'll probably go back to Wednesday then, because this week I switched it to Thursday because I had a meeting yesterday and an appointment in the afternoon, so I couldn't make the live thing yesterday. But um, pronunciation course. Yeah, it's a different video, but there's also on our website, there's a whole page that shows the curriculum and it has a sample lesson and stuff. But basically, I can give a quick overview. How to learn classical Chinese. I did that 3 weeks ago, man. So go to our YouTube channel and look at some of the recent videos. I did like an hour and a half long live stream on how to learn classical Chinese. It was really good, I thought. I covered probably 20 different books or something like that. So the pronunciation course, I will go over that real quick before I move on with the rest of the main topic today. So the pronunciation course, the first unit talks about like your mindset, how to approach learning pronunciation. I cover a concept of like the practice room. And again, I use my musical background to say like, if you're a jazz musician, what you practice and what you perform are different things. So like when you're out performing, you don't want to be consciously thinking about the things that you've been practicing. You just want to let it come out if it's going to come out. You don't want to even think about that stuff. But when you're practicing on very specific stuff. And what happens is those things that you're practicing in your practice room will come out during performance naturally without having to, if you're thinking about it, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to screw up. And it's the same with learning language. Like if you're practicing tones, for example, say you've got some tone problems, and so you're working on that in your like study session at home in your practice room, and then you go out to talk to somebody and you're constantly thinking about tones, well, it's going to mess up your ability to have a conversation. So when you're out and this is your performance, when you're out talking to people, you don't need to think about those tones that you've been working on. But what you'll notice is if you're practicing correctly, they'll start to come out correctly when you're out talking, and it'll get better and better. So I talk about that in the first unit, and I talk about a few other things of like practice until you can't get it wrong. A lot of people will practice until they get it right, but you need to go further than that and practice until you can't get it wrong. Unit 2 talks about the basics of pronunciation. So I cover like syllable structure. I teach all the consonants and vowels in Mandarin. I teach tones, and there's a bunch of like audio drills. It's, I think, a really solid foundation that will allow you to pronounce any single syllable or two syllable words accurately. And then Unit 3 goes into like sentence level, intonation, rhythm, shadowing and chorusing, which are two really powerful techniques for not only improving your pronunciation and accent, but also improving your fluency, for getting a better, more intuitive feel for grammar instead of like an analytical feel. It's like when you speak your native language, you know when something is wrong because it feels wrong. You may also know the rule, but you may not know the rule. But if somebody uses incorrect grammar, you just have that feeling like, that's not right. Approaching learning Chinese from an audio standpoint and using these techniques, the chorusing and shadowing techniques, will over time will install that same sort of feeling for the grammar. Even if you don't know the rule, it'll feel wrong to say something incorrectly. So that's what Unit 3 is about. And the techniques in Unit 3 can take you all the way up, as far as you want to go in the language. The techniques, if you put the work in, will get you to the point where you have a native-like accent. They're techniques that even like conference interpreters use. So they're good for anywhere between intermediate all the way up to near native. They're useful techniques for that. So let's see. Oh, there's a bunch of bunch of questions. I tell you what, I'm gonna get back into the main topic, and then I'll go through and look at all these comments at the end, and we'll do kind of a little Q&A session. So let's get back to studying in Taiwan. Um, okay, so let's see. I talked about teachers, your ability to be to switch teachers if you want. Okay, curriculum. So basically, the curriculum at MTC, you start off, if you're a beginner, you start off with, at the time, it was the Practical Audiovisual Chinese. It's called like 实用视听华语. And there's 5 books in that series. Now, I think they've replaced that series. The series is still available, but I think at MTC they use a different series of textbooks now called Modern Chinese, 时代华语. Let me see if I'll pull up the text thing so I can so 时代华语 Modern Chinese. I believe that's the textbook series that they use at the lower levels now. At the time, it was Practical Audio Visual. And basically, it was 5 books. I think Modern Chinese is 4. I don't remember exactly. But basically, there are other textbook options at those lower levels, the like beginning and intermediate levels. But pretty much everyone does the standard textbook. They usually have, maybe 1 or 2 classes available for people who want to use a different textbook, but pretty much everyone uses those standard ones. And they're good. I mean, they're good, solid textbooks for that level. So there's nothing wrong with it. After that, you can kind of start to branch out and specialize if you want. So like when you get to level 5, for example, when I was there, level 5, first you would do Far East Chinese Book 3, and then level 5 Part B was either Practical Audiovisual Chinese Book 5, or you could do the mini radio plays. And I talked about these in last week's video on textbooks. So if you're interested in the textbooks themselves, go back and check out that video. And then after that, most people do like a class on reading newspapers. So reading newspapers is level 6. There's other stuff at level 6 too. I forget exactly what, but you start to get to where you have more variety. And what they'll do is, if you have enough people that want to take a specific book at like level 6, for instance, all you have to do is to get like 5 people together, and they'll open a section for that textbook. So if you're there and you have friends that want to do a specific textbook with you, and it's not one of the ones that they normally offer, you can do it. So like I said, most people did the learning Chinese with newspaper, I think is what it's called. It's called, in Chinese, it's called 读报学华语. 读报学华语. And for those of you who want simplified, there's the simplified. That's what most people do at level 6. I took a course called, I forget what it was called. It was like recent news, oral training, or something like that. It was kind of a weird name, but it was also based on newspaper, but instead of getting this newspaper textbook, we actually used recent stories from the newspaper. So like every day, I think 2 people would bring in a news story from the previous 3 days, and we would all read it, and then we would discuss it. So you get a lot of practice talking about current events. You learn a lot of really relevant vocabulary to what's going on at the time. It was a super useful class. So if you're at MTC and they offer that recent news class and you're at that level, I highly recommend taking it. It was it did a lot for my Chinese ability. Um, let's see. Um, go over the levels in more detail. Yeah, I will. Let me do that during the Q&A at the end. Let me kind of get through the main stuff first, and then I'll try to go back and answer all these questions. Um, so okay, then after level six, not many people go beyond level six. I think they have 8 levels or maybe 9. I did level 7, which was uh, Thought and Society, 思想与社会, and I think there were 5 people in my class at that level, and I think that was the only level 7 class offered that semester, if I remember right. They do offer classes higher than that. They offer classes in classical Chinese, but again, you have to have enough people interested in it. So if you want to do something like that, it's good to like go around and talk to other students or post something on the bulletin board saying like anyone interested in studying, level 8 textbook number whatever, call me and we'll try to put a class together. You can also put a small group class together where you have only like 2 or 3 people. They'll do that for you. It costs a little more. And you can even do one-on-one. So they do like one-on-one classes. Again, it's even more expensive. But it is doable if there's something specific that you want to study that isn't offered. Or if don't have enough, you don't have the time, say you have a full-time job and you only have like an hour a day that you can devote to class, then you can do a one-on-one for an hour a day or 1 hour 3 times a week or, whatever you want to do. So those are also options. You don't have to enroll in the full class. They're pretty flexible. Um, Field trips. I think they actually do field trips. I think they're only at the lower levels. Like by the time I was in the mini radio plays class, which was my 3rd semester, we didn't do any more field trips. So it's probably only for people that are, in the beginning book series. But we went to my 1st semester, we went to like a pineapple cake factory and museum. So pineapple cake is like um, it's like this little pastry with like a sweet pineapple paste, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it. And then with like if you know Fig Newtons, pineapple pastries are kind of like that. Like it's got that kind of pastry shell on the outside and pineapple filling on the inside. They're delicious. We went there and we made our own pineapple cakes, and we also like toured the museum and whatnot. It was a pretty fun trip. You learn a lot of like cooking related vocabulary while you're doing it because they tell you to mix up the whatever, and so you learn how to say like mix. And for me, I was a beginner level, so it was new vocabulary for me. Um, so yeah, some of the field trips they do are fun. We also went to Maokong, which is it's I think it's technically within Taipei City, but it's sort of on the outskirts. You take like a gondola ropeway up to the top of the mountain, and it's a good like 10 degrees cooler up there, and it's nice to go when it's hot outside. And there's little tea shops all over the place up on this mountain, where you can go and sit and have really good Taiwanese um, oolong cha, which is what they're known for, um, and snacks and whatnot. So that was a really fun trip that we took. We also did things like this wasn't a field trip. We actually they have a kitchen at the MTC for the students. And we went into the kitchen and made like homemade dumplings once with our teacher. So a lot of little field trips and extracurricular stuff. Um, Pineapple cakes are actually made with winter melons. Yeah, actually, now that you say that, I remember that. Um, and there's some of them that also have cranberry in them. I've seen those too. Yeah, that is funny. I completely forgot about that. Industry specific classes at MTC. Uh, there are some like business Chinese classes, and I think those are offered reasonably frequently. Chinese for engineers, not that I know of, not that I remember. I think they do have legal Chinese, like for lawyers. Medical Chinese, maybe. Engineers, I don't think I ever saw something for engineers. I would think, mm, I don't know. I don't know if ICLP has it or not. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure about that one. But um, yeah, other extracurricular stuff. So if you're in the, well, if you're on a student visa, you're required to have a certain number of hours of class time per week. I can't remember how many it is. It's like 20 or 15. Is it 20? Anyway, it's some 15 or 20 hours a week of class time. But if you're in the regular class where you only have 2 hours of class time per day, you have to fill that other time in with other things. Like you can go to like sit in the library for like study hour or whatever, and then you get like an hour stamp on your card, and so that counts as like an extra hour of class time. Or you can do some of the extracurricular classes. So they have oh yeah, ICLP has Chinese for diplomats. That's right. I don't think they have that at MTC, but ICLP at the higher levels does have some, specialized um, courses. Legal Chinese, I know they have diplomats. Yeah, um, Chinese for business is pretty common at most places, I think. Um, but so yeah, you can sit in the library and you get credit for that time, or you can go sign up for some of these like cultural classes, which most of them meet like once or twice a week. Um, and there's a bunch of different ones. Like I took one on calligraphy. There's one on where you like watch a Taiwanese TV series. There's one where you listen to music and like learn the lyrics. There's one where you can learn Taiwanese. I sat in on that one for a few classes, but ended up not taking it, I think. There's one on tea appreciation and that's one of the most popular ones where uh, apparently in that one, which I never took, but apparently by the end of the semester, you know quite a bit about the Chinese tea tradition. So if you're at MTC and you're interested in tea, um, that's supposed to be a really good class. And there's even a Chinese cooking uh, class. So like I said, there's a big kitchen. There's several stations in the kitchen, and so you can actually take a cooking class where you learn how to make that stuff. So, or to make Chinese food. There's also sports. I don't think any of the sports count in your class time hours, but you are able to do sports at the university. So, I had friends that did soccer. They, played on the soccer team. I had friends who did gymnastics. There's a gymnastics team at Shida. They have dragon boat every year. They have the dragon boat races, and so I had a lot of friends at MTC that were on the dragon boat team, and they would get up like before dawn every day and like go do their like team practice or whatever for dragon boat for months. And I remember like there was this Japanese girl in my class first semester who did that. And by the end of it, by the time they did the race, she had these like muscles bulging out everywhere. She was like, I've never been this fit in my life. It's amazing. So, and it's fun. You go and you can watch the dragon boat races and, see your friends out there or participate yourself. I didn't do it myself, but is buying fresh fruit and veg in Taipei expensive? Not at all. It's so unbelievably cheap. And actually, still, every time I go back to Taiwan, because fruit is fairly expensive here in Japan, first thing I do when I get checked into my Airbnb or whatever is I'll go find a fruit shop and buy a big bag full of fruit to eat while I'm there. Yeah, the fruit's super cheap and it's amazing. It's really, really good fruit, and there's a huge variety of it. So, um, excuse me. And university life. So, university life at MTC, you're able to go participate in stuff. So, you can use the library. Like I said, the MTC building is directly across the way from the library, and MTC students have full access. I'm not sure if you can check out books, but you can go use the library. You can take books off the shelves and read them. You may be able to check out books. I can't remember. I used to do a lot of my studying there. I would just go to the library and sit down and study if I didn't want to be like outside at the picnic table area where I could get distracted by ash, basically. We used to like, I'd be sitting there studying, and he'd come over, and it was like, okay, now I'm not going to be able to study for the next 2 or 3 hours because we're going to get into some conversation, and we always did. So I used to say like, dude, I gotta go. I got studying to do. I've got to. So I would go into the library to like escape the conversation. But yeah, beef is expensive. That's true. Beef is kind of expensive in Taiwan. Not as expensive as it is in Tokyo, though. I maybe took it for granted in Taiwan. Um, yeah, produce is cheap and it's good quality. Meat is a little pricier, but you can eat pretty cheaply in Taipei. Like, there's a lot of little local restaurants and stuff that are, you can go and get a good meal for $3 US, something like that. So $3 to $5. Um, yeah, cost of living there is not bad at all. I mean, compared to some places, I guess it's higher, but like I moved there from the U.S. and now I live in Japan. Taiwan is much more affordable than those places. Um, so like I said, at the university, you can use the library. You can also audit real university courses. If your Chinese is good enough, all you have to do is go and talk to the professor and, ask for permission to audit the course. So I actually did that I guess it was my third semester. I don't think it was, yeah, it must have been third semester. It was a spring semester. So it was while I was taking that newspaper course. And I was studying thought and society on the side. So I was at a, reasonably high level, high enough that I could attend the course and understand. And I took like an intro to paleography. It was a graduate level course, but it was, an intro course for grad students, teaching about like the different resources and materials that are used in paleography. Um, so yeah, you can participate in a lot of stuff at the university at Shida. Um, and I'm sure there's stuff that I'm missing too. Um, well, so actually one thing, like I said earlier, one of my friends lived in the dorm, and he would eat at the cafeteria a lot. So you can use the cafeteria as an MTC student, even though, it's for university students, but you count. Um, yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that you can do that I haven't even thought about including, but yeah, you're basically, for most intents and purposes, you're basically a university student if you're at MTC. So, um, how did you deal with the massive amount of information dumped on you? I spent 2 semesters at Shida and one at Taida. My brain exploded. I couldn't keep up with it. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I talked a little bit in the previous live stream, the one I did last week about textbooks. I talked a little bit about um, how much, I mean, I was just super hardcore with it. I was on scholarship, and I was tutoring a few times a week, so I had some extra income. Um, but I basically studied full time. And so even when I was done with my homework for class, I would like go and study other textbooks on the side. For most people, that's not doable. Like I said, I was a full-time student. I didn't have to do anything else. And I was there. My sole purpose was to get as good at Chinese as I possibly could, as quickly as I possibly could. So I went really hardcore with it. Maybe I'll do another topic that we'll do for one of these live streams will be like how I studied Chinese. And like I can go through what I did before I moved to Taiwan, what I did while I was there, um, what I did at different stages while I was there, because, my approach changed a lot while I was in Taiwan. That could be a good topic. Um, but I would say spaced repetition helps a lot. I had a lot of friends that would use like paper flashcards and just flip through them all the time, and you're going to be reviewing way more often than you need to if you're doing paper card, unless you have some system of spacing them out, efficiently. But using a space repetition system like Anki or Plico flashcards, or like I was talking about earlier, Hack Chinese, will lessen that reviewing burden a lot. Another thing was approaching things from an audio standpoint. That really helped. Um, like learning to process the language more as sound and not text. That really helped me to retain stuff a lot better and get a better feel for the language. Um, so, what else? Social life. So, social life at MTC, and I guess at any other uh, university language program in Taiwan, probably most of them in China, probably going to be fairly similar. But um, the exception would be ICLP or one of these super intensive courses where you have no time to do anything else except for study. Um, at MTC, the course load is lighter, so you do have social time. So what we used to do is uh, after class, either my classmates, like once or twice a week, my classmates would we'd get together after class and go out and eat or go to a bar or whatever. And then there were also people that weren't in my class but were in other classes that I had just met from hanging out around MTC that I became friends with them. This big group of Dutch people, actually, Leiden University sends a bunch of students to MTC every year. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was like basically, so the classes start anywhere from like 8 a.m. to like 5 p.m. or something like that. I forget exactly the time range, but you can tell them what time you prefer. So my first semester, I think our class let out at 5 p.m. So we would basically like hang out around school for a little bit and then meet back up and then go out for dinner a lot of times. And then I would get to class early, or I'd get to school early the next day and do all my studying and whatnot. Um, so my evenings were, open for socializing. Uh, so that's, I mean, socializing at MTC, which most people at first basically hang out with other students, but then you can also go out and you can meet people that go to Shida, and you can easily go out and meet other people in Taipei. Taiwanese people are super friendly, so you can just go out and talk to people. They'll talk to you. There's a lot of cool bars around, like one that Ash and I used to go to is called 45s. It is at number 45, Heping Donglu. It's like just down the street from Shida. We used to hang out there a lot. There's a bar on the same street but the opposite direction called Bobunde, or we call it Bob's. It's a cool little, like, they've got craft beer and they've got live music once a week, sometimes twice a week, I think. There's a bunch of regulars that go there, foreigners and locals. So it's super easy to go out and meet people. Like, actually, a friend of mine he went to a library and met a girl and started talking to her, and they are now married, and I think they have a kid now. So, I mean, it's just the social life in Taipei is good. It's easy to get out and meet people. It's easy to socialize. It's not too expensive. It can be expensive if you want it to be. Taipei can be as expensive as you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be. So social life is a lot of fun. There's a lot to do. Um, all right, I think that's pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. Oh, I guess I could talk about like other stuff to do in Taipei. Like, obviously, there's the National Palace Museum, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, collection of Chinese historical artifacts in the world. It's incredible. It's definitely worth going. Sometimes it's really busy and super crowded, and then other times it's not so bad. So, if your first experience is bad and there's too many people there, go another time. Um, I think is it free? I can't remember. It's either free or pretty cheap to get in, and they have special exhibits all the time. Definitely worth going to that. There's a lot of stuff you can do around town in Taipei. There's a lot of hiking. Hiking is very popular. There's a few mountains nearby that you can go hiking on. There's um, a lot of people would get out of Taipei on the weekends and go like mountain climbing, further south. People would go on like bike trips or like motorcycle trips down the coast. The east coast of Taiwan is absolutely gorgeous. Getting around the island is not too expensive. You can get a high speed rail ticket from Taipei down to Kaohsiung, I think is the last stop, for like something like $50 US, which is obscenely cheap if you compare it to Shinkansen prices here in Japan. Um, or you can also just take the train, which is much cheaper, like the regular train. It takes longer to get there, but it's cheaper. I did a Huandao trip my last year there. Huandao is like to go all the way around the island. And so we started from Taipei, we went down to Taichung, Tainan, and then Kaohsiung. I think we went to Kending. Kending is a tiny little beach town in the south, at the very southern tip. It's beautiful. I definitely recommend going. There's a main street that goes through it, and at night that main street turns into like a night market, playing loud music and lots of food to eat and stuff. So, and then we went back up the east coast, went to Hualien and Taidong, and then back up to Taipei. And I think we went to Geelong, but yeah, that's the Huandao trip. I think we spent 2 weeks doing it. You can spend longer, obviously, like there's a lot to see. Um, there's also like, let me think. I was just thinking of, Kending the beach. There's surfing if you go to Geelong. I forget the name of the beach that's over there, but if you're into surfing, there's surfing there. There's some surfing down in Kending. So if that's your thing. And the food, the night markets, that's what I was going to talk about. Night market food in Taipei is awesome. Like it's cheap, there's tons of variety, it's fresh, it's delicious, and they're always coming up with new creative stuff. So like every time that you go to a night market, well, not every time you go, but like now every time I go, because I only go back, once or twice a year, there's usually new stuff to try. So definitely recommend checking out that if you're into, food, which I think most people are. I miss Taiwan so much. Yeah, it's such a pleasant place to live. I mean, people are just really friendly, nice. It's very safe. There's very little crime. I one time I was in a coffee shop and I think my wallet, I think my laptop, and like a bag of stuff that I had bought, like books or something. I don't remember why. I panicked because I was late for class, and so I just got up and went to class, and then I realized like 2 hours later I had left my laptop sitting there, I had left my wallet, or maybe it was my phone, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, 2 hours later it was all just still sitting there, which would never ever happen in the US. Like, uh, you would hope some good person would like give it to the staff working at the coffee shop and they would keep it for you, but it could very easily be gone. But in Taipei, I talked to the girl working at the coffee shop and I was like, it's my stuff is still here 2 hours later. How is that even possible? And she was like, oh, people thought you were probably just still there for 2 hours. So yeah, like super low crime rate. It's really safe, pleasant place to live. Okay, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover, so I'm gonna go back. I know I missed a lot of questions earlier in the chat, so let me see. I'll try to cover those, and if anyone has any other questions in the meantime, go ahead and type them into the chat, and I'll try to get to them. Let's see. That we already covered. Let's see. Pronunciation course I covered. How to learn classical Chinese. So yeah, like I said, we did a live stream about this one 3 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, 3 weeks ago. About how to learn classical Chinese. 2 weeks ago we did how to learn to read, and a little bit about how to learn to write handwriting and cursive in Chinese. Whether it's modern people's cursive or like historical documents written in cursive. So that one was pretty interesting. Last week I did one about intermediate and advanced textbooks. And so all three of those, I just had stacks of books here on the desk that I was like holding up and showing and recommending, and just like I had a ton of books that I recommended in those. So if you're looking for resources for those topics, I recommend checking those out. We've got a bunch of other topics coming up soon. Like I said, next week we'll probably talk about Old and Middle Chinese and like how the question was, how do we know what Middle Chinese and Old Chinese sounded like? And that's actually Ash's research expertise. That's a large part of what he's done his coursework and stuff on. So I'm going to get him to come in and we'll, may do it like interview style. I'm not sure. We'll get him to talk about that. Um, that should be pretty interesting for those of you who are, interested in that or just want to hear like what type of research we do for, to make our products. Because the old Chinese stuff is a large part. Like anytime we say that in our dictionary that something is a sound component in a character, um, a lot of times it's not obvious because the component and the character are pronounced fairly differently, and so it's kind of hard to see the connection. And the reason we can say confidently that that's a sound component is because we know that in Old Chinese they were pronounced very similarly. So yeah, we're going to talk about that research, sort of like some of the evidence that we use to know what the language sounded like back then, and then also how that information informs like our understanding of the modern characters and how we explain it to you guys in the dictionary. So that should be a fun one. Let's see. What do I think of the recent changes to the HSK levels? I think it's I I haven't looked at it super in depth. I have looked at the new character list because we want to make sure that we cover, as many of these HSK characters as possible. I think, like I said, or maybe I said this over on the Facebook Live earlier. We've got another update to the dictionary coming, and I believe I don't hold me to this because I may be wrong, but I believe it's going to cover the HSK 1 through 6 from the new HSK, all the characters from those levels, and probably some of 7. I'll have to look at it again, but I think it's a good, from what I've seen, I think it's a good step. If you know some of the history of the HSK, the current version is HSK 2.0. So the previous version, 1.0, had something like 9 levels or 11 levels, I forget. And it was super hard. Like when you got into the higher levels, if you could pass HSK 11, I think was the highest level, your Chinese was really, really good. But there were issues with it. Like the recordings you had to listen to were like 30 years old and super staticky and hard to understand. And so that it wasn't really a good indication of your language ability. It was more like how well can you distinguish this stuff on staticky recordings. Like there was a lot of problems with it. Then they came out with a new HSK, the 2.0, and they had it like level 1 through 6, and they wanted to make it so that it was like so that it lined up with the European, like the A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And so HSK level 6 was like touted as being equivalent to C2. C2 is like an educated native speaker. HSK 6 is nowhere near that. So there was a lot of criticism saying that, the test says it's supposed to show that you're at this level, but it really only shows that you're here. Um, and yeah, it also like it sets, I think it sets bad expectations. Did I say expectations? Expectations. Um, because what happens is, and it's similar to like when I was at MTC, we had the practical audio visual Chinese books. That's what everyone started with, and so that's what people knew. And I don't remember how many conversations I had with people when I would say like, oh well yeah, but when you get into the higher books, blah blah blah, and they're like, what, like book 5? No 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 no, after book 5. There's books after book 5? Like they had no idea. Because that was the last book in the series, right? And so that they didn't even know that you could go higher than that. And it's like, I think the HSK kind of does the same thing where people think of HSK 6 as like the highest level of attainment that you can get in Chinese, but it's not. It's like, from what I know of the HSK, HSK 6 is like upper intermediate, you know. And so people set their sights on it like it's the end goal, and then when you get there, it's like, man, there's still a lot I can't do. So yeah, I think it sets bad expectations. So I think adding more levels beyond that and sort of making the jump between each level more consistent, I think is a good move. It sets people's expectations a little bit better. They know that, you know, HSK 6 is probably good enough for most things if you want to live in China. But if you want to use Chinese professionally, you've got to go beyond that. From what I can tell, the way they've set it up is a big improvement. But then we have, I think the actual HSK exams won't be changed for now. I think that's right. I was told that by somebody else, that it'll be another year or two, I think, before they actually change the exams. So they've published all what the changes will be, but the exams that people are taking currently are still HSK 2.0. So I think it's next year or the following year that they're going to start doing the 3.0 exams. Let's see. I don't quite know how to ask this. Is the pronunciation course complete enough that it's self-contained, everything you need to practice in one place? Yeah. It's actually, so like I talked about earlier, first unit is like kind of mindset, how to approach it. It's more about that. The second unit is so the second unit is actually based on the old FSI. It's called like Standard Chinese, a modular approach. And the first module, so FSI is the Foreign Service Institute. It's the branch of government that trains like diplomats and stuff in the U.S. Excuse me. This course was published in the 50s, or 60s. I forget. I think maybe 60s. And it's public domain, but the documents, like the workbook and whatnot, you can download it all online, but it's like typewritten pages. The recordings are from the 60s, so they're some of the vocabulary they use is a little outdated and whatnot, but it's the first module. It's called Pronunciation and Romanization. So what I did basically for Unit 2 of our pronunciation course is I took those lessons and completely redid them. So they're nice typed up PDF pages. I've updated the vocabulary. I changed a bunch of the examples, and I completely redid the recordings. So instead of those recordings from the 60s, it's my voice and native, modern native speaker recordings. So it's you can still use the FSI materials if you want something that's free and publicly available. But if you want something that's, I would say, a lot more polished and modern and updated, that's what Unit 2 is. And there's also a lot of additional information in Unit 2. So the original course, the FSI course, is just audio and, textbook or, typewritten exercises. I've added video, so there's several lessons worth of video in that unit, where I explain some of the concepts from a different angle or in more detail, or I teach about things like syllable structure, which they don't really teach in the FSI materials, that I think helps to grasp the stuff a lot more. But to answer the question, it does basically, at the end of that unit, you'll have a really solid grasp of pinyin and tones, and you'll be able to pronounce any syllable that you see in Chinese accurately. And we also cover two-syllable words. We cover how tones interact with each other in two-syllable words. So everyone knows the third tone rule, where if you have two third tones in a row, the first one becomes a second tone, right? And then most people also know that bu, meaning not, and yi, meaning one, have some tone changes that happen when they appear before other words. But we also, so we talk about that, of course, but then we also talk about like if there's 2 second, for example, if there's 2 second tones in a row, the first one will be a little higher than the second one. And so we talk about little changes like that. They're still both second tones, but the relative the pitch relative to each other will change a little bit. And so we cover that for all the different tone combinations. So yeah, it's Unit 2 is like a self-contained, you'll learn how to pronounce everything that you'll need to pronounce in Chinese as far as like single syllables and 2 syllable words. Unit 3 is all about teaching techniques. So we don't actually supply very much in the way of like audio material for you in Unit 3, but what we do is teach you techniques to use when you're studying like from your textbook. So what to do with your textbook audio. Or if you're watching a TV show, how do you get the most out of like listening and imitating to the actors on the TV show? How do you like find somebody whose accent and cadence you want to imitate and learn it and absorb it and adapt it into your own speech. So yeah, Unit 3 is about techniques and how to apply those techniques to like textbook audio and audio that you find out in the real world, intended for native speakers. So it's super, I would say it's very comprehensive. I mean, I'm a little biased because I did most of the course myself, but it's quite comprehensive. It's like 5 hours of video or maybe 6 hours of video, 3 hours worth of audio stuff, no, maybe more, and a bunch of exercises and drills and stuff. So yeah, it's quite comprehensive. Oh, okay, somebody replied. Pascal, yeah. The course breakdown different aspects of Chinese pronunciation really helps how to improve them one by one efficiently. Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen people have sent us recordings of themselves, and I mean, I might have to ask some of them if I can use their recordings and like actually play them for you guys, because the the difference is staggering sometimes. Like we've had people that sent recordings of themselves 3 days apart, like one that they made before applying the technique they were working on, and one that they made after a few days of using the technique, and it's like worlds different. It's crazy. So yeah, I'm quite proud of how the course turned out. Um, it took longer than I wanted to finish it, but now that it's done, I think it's quite good. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend checking it out. Now, if you're not sure you want the whole thing, we do have it's called like the Intro to Pronunciation in Pinyin, which is on our site. The full price is listed as like $49, but I have it set up right now so that there's an automatic discount. That you get it for $29. So that I'll probably keep it that way for a while, and I think it's basically Unit 2 if I remember right, or maybe Unit 1 and Unit 2 from the pronunciation course, but with some of the extra stuff left out. So, but it is like if you need an intro to pronunciation or you need like um, extra practice with tones and stuff, I would say the intro, and you're not sure if you want the full masterclass, the intro course is the one to get. And if you decide later you want to upgrade to the masterclass, which has a lot more material and has that Unit 3 with all the techniques and also has like a long interview with Ash about how to fix tones and a few other things that aren't in the intro, you can always upgrade to the masterclass later on. Just get in touch with us and, we'll make sure that you don't have to, you'll only have to pay the difference in price. So, can I go over these levels in more detail, the NTNU ones? I'll try. It'll be off the top of my head though. If I remember correctly, there were 9 levels at the MTC. And of course, level 1 is you have 0 experience learning Chinese. Level 9, if I remember right, is all classical Chinese. And I don't think there was a level 9 class offered the entire time I was there. So, excuse me. Most people basically, after level 4, is where a lot of people drop out. So they stop going to class. Because once you finish level 4, which at the time was Practical Audiovisual Chinese Book 4, you can basically get by in Taiwan in Chinese. Like, you can't, you probably can't read a newspaper, probably can't watch TV and understand everything, but you can get by in daily life. You can make conversation with people. You can hang out with your friends and speak Chinese. Um, you can order food and whatnot. So your basic daily life stuff. If you want to go further and be able to read newspapers, be able to watch TV, be able to like watch news on TV, that's more like level 5, 6, and 7. So 5 is like the textbook I used was mini radio plays. Um, and they weren't real plays from Taiwanese radio, but they were like simulated to be like that. Um, but it's a really good book. And at the end of radio plays, like I was starting to feel pretty comfortable in Taiwan. And then level 6 was newspaper. Most people take newspaper at level 6. So there's a textbook about how to learn to read newspapers called like 读报学华语, the one that I put up on the screen earlier. And then there was the one that I took, which was recent news, where we would read a newspaper article from the previous couple of days, and then we would like discuss it in class. So I preferred that because it was all recent news, and it was also, we covered way more content because like the newspaper textbook I think is like 10 or 12 lessons if I remember right, and there's one article per lesson. So in that semester doing that book, you do like 10 or 12 newspaper articles total. We did 1 or 2 per day. I forget exactly how many, but if it's 1 per day and you're talking about like a 12-week quarter, so that's like 60 newspaper articles that we read. It may have been 1 per day. If it's 2, you're talking about 120 newspaper articles. I mean, it's just way more. And so you don't go as in depth to everyone and like learn everything, memorize everything the way you do in the newspaper textbook, but we covered a whole lot more material and learned a lot more vocabulary, I think, than we would have in the normal newspaper class. Level 7 is Thought and Society. I think that's the standard book at level 7. There's other options, but Thought and Society is such a good textbook, and it gets you ready to have, excuse me. I go into more detail on this in the textbooks video, so I won't go too much right now, but it basically gets you to the point where you can start reading serious books in Chinese. You can attend lectures in Chinese on different topics. You can probably watch TED Talks. There's still going to be stuff you don't understand, of course, but you're getting to that level where you can start participating in serious stuff in Chinese. Level 8, I think, was The Independent Reader, is the standard textbook at level 8, but it's pretty rarely offered. So, yeah, but by that point, like I stopped after Thought and Society. I studied The Independent Reader on my own. So I only went up to level 7. But then by that point, I was also working as a freelance translator. I was auditing classes, in the graduate department of Chinese, Chinese literature and linguistics. I audited like a class on intro to paleography. So by the time you're at level 7, you're pretty comfortable. There's still plenty of room to go. There's plenty of improvement to make, but that's as far as I went at MTC. So this one I've covered. Let's see. Fresh fruit and veg. Taiwan has the best vegetarian food in the world. They've got really good vegetarian food. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a vegetarian, but I had some friends in Taiwan that were, so we would sometimes go to, veggie restaurants. There's so I don't know a whole lot about like religion in Taiwan and Buddhism and stuff, but it seems like this whichever sect of Buddhism is most popular in Taiwan, I guess, is vegetarian. So a lot of vegetarian restaurants in Taipei or in Taiwan are meant for this particular type of like Buddhist vegetarian, which to my understanding, it's not just about not eating meat, it's also um, not eating anything that stimulates the body too much. So like spicy food and garlic. Um, so there's no garlic. Instead, they put a lot of ginger on the vegetarian food in Taiwan. Uh, the food is delicious. I mean, there's actually a vegetarian restaurant across the street from the MTC. I believe it's still there. It was the last time I was in town. And I used to go there like once a week with one of my, vegetarian friends for lunch. It was really, really good. Now, if you're vegetarian in Taiwan and you're not at a vegetarian restaurant, you have to be very specific because a lot of times, like, the same friend would go out with us to other restaurants and just try to order vegetarian items. And she would tell them, like, I don't eat meat. Please don't bring me any meat, any seafood, anything like that, chicken. Um, and they would bring her food, and sure enough, it would have little bits of pork in it. And she would say, like, I said no meat. I can't eat meat. And they're like, oh, but it makes it taste better. That was literally one of the responses she got. Oh, it makes it taste better. So you have to be super specific. Or if you have like shellfish allergies, things like that, you have to be very, very clear about do not bring me this, I will die. I don't think shellfish allergies are very common in Taiwan, so it's not something that people like are super familiar with. So if you have like food allergies or you have very specific dietary needs, I mean, ask some Taiwanese people how to go about telling them because you'll need to learn how to get really specific about what you can and can't have. Because I guess it's getting more common there than it was even 10 years ago when I was there. But it's still not super common. So I would recommend like err on the side of caution and being overly specific if that's something you need. My Anki deck has thousands of cards. I couldn't imagine doing it on paper. Yeah, I know. I had friends that had literally like would carry around a box like this with like hundreds and hundreds of vocabulary flashcards, and I couldn't wrap my head around why you would do that instead of using your phone or computer, Anki, or I used Plico. But another thing is like I think a lot of people. I think I talked about this last week. I used to go like I would go a week or two without reviewing, and because I was learning so much vocabulary, I was studying so intensively. If I missed a week, I would sometimes come back to like 500 or 1,000 reviews that I had missed. And it was just so overwhelming to get through all of that. And what I eventually learned was just delete it or like reset it or something. Because the words that you need, you're going to encounter again. So, uh, I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to delete everything you've done, but don't be afraid to like ditch stuff in order to be able to keep moving forward. It's way better than like getting overwhelmed and just saying, screw it and not reviewing anymore. Um, so yeah, that I think that's a really useful thing that gets overlooked is don't be afraid to delete your flashcard deck and start from scratch if it gets too unwieldy. Because again, if the word's important, you will encounter it again and just add it, back to the deck. Let's see. Does does anyone at MTC work while they go to school? For example, while they go to school at their company's local office in Taiwan. Yeah, that does happen. There was actually a Japanese guy in my, I forget if he was in my first semester or second semester class, and he had a full-time job that he had to, it was like his, I think it was his dad's company, and they had an office in Taiwan, and so he was there working in the Taiwan office and also taking classes to learn Chinese. Um, so yeah, it is something people do. I knew at least one guy that worked at a translation agency and then would come and take 2 hours worth of class. This was when I was in the Thought and Society class. So he had a full time job as a translator at an agency, and then he would do his 2 hours of class in the morning. I think our class for that book was at like 8 a.m., and so he would just go straight to work after that. So yeah, I mean, some people work full time. It's not. it's not the norm, I would say, because most of the people there, especially at the lower levels, are like college students that are on their year abroad or something. Um, or like me, I was 26 when I moved to Taiwan, so it was after college for me, but um, I was on scholarship and I was, like I said, I was tutoring. So I had a few English students that I would teach one on one. And then later on, I picked up translation work. So actually, my last semester um, when I was studying thought and society, I was also working not quite full time, but nearly full time as a freelance translator. So yeah, it is doable. Uh, is Taipei tuition more expensive than other major cities? I think I'm not sure what tuition is like in China. I think these days it's a little more expensive. I think cost of living. What I mean is, I think tuition in big cities in China is more expensive than tuition in Taipei, from what I know. I could be completely wrong about that. I'm not sure. Cost of living in Taipei is, I'm almost positive it's lower than it is in like Beijing or Shanghai, and probably lower than some of the other, like some of the second tier cities in China. Um, you can live in Taipei pretty cheaply if you want to. Um, But as far as other cities in Taiwan, I guess Taipei is the most expensive in Taiwan. Um, Tainan is supposed to be quite affordable and really pleasant, and the food is awesome in Tainan. Like Tainan is known in Taiwan as having like the best food, um, and it's a really pleasant city. It's small enough you can bike around the city, and there's some really cool historical stuff there. Um, let's see. Sound reconstructions and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's going back to the old Chinese and Middle Chinese. I'm pretty sure that's what we'll do next week. I've got to confirm that with Ash that he's available for it. If not, we'll do something else. But I think we'll do that next week. It should be interesting. Let's see. Interpretation and translation is required for HSK 4 through 6 now, which is bizarre and makes no sense. Yeah, I mean, obviously at that level you're not doing like conference interpretation, right? But it is a skill that can be practiced at any level. I don't know if it's a skill that they ought to be testing at that level, especially HSK 4. Um, but it is like, a lot of people think that if you can speak both languages, then you can definitely translate or interpret, but it's not the case. It's a completely separate skill. So let's see. Studying for HSK 4 through 6 aren't interested in translation 95% of the time. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, they're definitely not going to be working as translators. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm torn on that. I have to think about that some more, whether that's useful at that stage or not. Because, like I said, it's a separate skill, so it's not necessarily about your language ability, but about being able to do that. Um, HSK 1 through 3 are much easier than other language proficiency exams. I think HSK 3 is still easier than the first topic on Korean. Well, I'm not familiar with the topic, but um, yeah, HSK 1 through 3. I think HSK 1 you have to know like 150 characters or something like that. I mean, it's a pretty low. I think in the new version, the 3.0, I think it's going to be more. So like the amount of stuff you have to learn for each level will be more uniform. Um, so I think that's a positive improvement. So, okay, what about TOEFL? So this is the test of Chinese as a foreign language. It's the standard test in Taiwan. It used to be called something else. It was called like the TOP Huayu when I lived there, or when I first moved there. And before that, it was called the TOC. So it was like the test of Chinese. Then the TOP Huayu was like the test of proficiency Huayu. A dumb name. And now it's the test of Chinese as a foreign language, the TOEFL. Um, the highest level of TOEFL is also level 6, but it is way harder than HSK 6. When I was in Taiwan, the highest level was level 5, which you had to, in order to go into the Chinese literature department where I did my master's coursework and where Ash is doing his PhD, In order to get into that department, you had to pass TOEFL level 5. And I passed it, but if I remember right, I just squeaked by. And that was, at that point, I was already working as a freelance translator. I had audited that class on paleography. I had taken that newspaper course where we read like 60 or 100 or however many newspaper articles that semester. So my Chinese was at a decent level. The problem with the TOEFL is that they test a lot of Chengyu. That's not bad in and of itself, but they throw these Chengyu into conversation. So you're listening to a recording of a conversation and they're talking in Chengyu, and it's just not the way people talk ever. And it's such a dense and awkward, stilted, mode of conversation. So you have to practice a very specific type of listening in order to pass the TOEFL. The reading was a little more, normal, but it's still, I mean, it's a standardized test. So what I did for preparation for that was a book that I recommended in last week's video called News and Views. It's 新闻与观点, News and Views. It's an ICLP textbook. As far as I know, the audio is not available anywhere. I had it because an ICLP student gave it to me. The textbook is available, but so I use that to prep for TOEFL level 5, and also like reviewed Thought and Society, and I did a few other things I forget, but and I barely squeaked by level 5. They added level 6 after I took it, or I think it was after I left Taiwan. So I never took level 6. I don't really know anything about it because I stopped paying attention after that. Let's see. 2 girls I've asked learned classical Chinese in middle school. Why is this classified as advanced Chinese subject? Okay, that's a good question, and it has to do with native speakers versus non-native speakers, right? So same for me when I was in middle school. Our English classes, we would read short stories from, famous English authors. Now, Chinese history or Chinese literature has a much longer history than English literature. And because of the fact that it's written with Chinese characters, it's a little bit easier to approach. Like, I can't read Beowulf in the original, right? And that's from like 800 AD. But I can read stuff in Chinese from that time because it's written in classical Chinese and there's like a continuity up until modern times. And it's something that everybody studies in school. And yeah, they start in middle school, and then in middle school it's pretty basic. You learn Chengyu and stuff like that from what I know, middle school curriculum in Taiwan anyway. And then you get into like more difficult text as you get older, and in high school you're reading like famous passages from like Su Shi and people like that. Excuse me. For non-native speakers, it's almost like a separate language. So to native speakers, it kind of seems like it's the same language because there's that continuity. To non-native speakers, you're learning modern Mandarin, and then you see classical Chinese. The grammar is different, the usage is different. It makes sense, I think, to approach it like 2 separate languages. And so that's like in the classical Chinese live stream I did a few weeks ago, I talk about starting with really ancient texts and then working your way toward more modern ones, where a lot of native speakers, if they haven't taught classical Chinese to foreigners before, they'll recommend the exact opposite. They'll go, oh no, start with stuff from the Qing dynasty and then work your way back. That's actually, I think, harder for a non-native speaker, because classical Chinese, like old classical Chinese, is quite terse and very structured, and later classical Chinese tends to be much more flowery and ornate and literary. Sorry. So it makes sense, I think, to approach to approach it like you're learning two languages. You're learning modern and you're learning classical, and then your classical, you can start with old stuff and kind of move your way forward. And that way you learn the grammar and the rules of how it's written, and then you can get into the more ornate styles later on. That's what makes sense to me, I think. Do I know the Routledge course in Chinese media literacy? I don't, sorry. Most of the stuff that I've seen from that publisher has been excellent, so I'm sure it's probably good, but I don't have any personal experience with it. Some pedagogical methods at Taiwan University seem better than on the mainland. Which teaching methods do you recommend? I don't have really an opinion on that. I've never spent any time in mainland China. I don't really know how their teaching methods differ from what's in Taiwan. I'm familiar with some of the um, things like IUP in Beijing, which is run by Stanford University. I'm familiar with programs like that, but as far as like the regular schools, I don't really know. I assumed that they were probably similar to what's done in Taiwan, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Let's see. One thing to do a guided read of a passage from the Analects. It's another thing entirely to take a text you've never seen before and be able to read it. That's for sure, yeah. If it's a classical text, like if it's a well-known one, there's usually, and again, like check out the video that I did a few weeks ago because I talk about this. You usually have commentary available, and you usually have notes from scholars explaining certain things. So, but yeah, to like pick up something that, say you're doing archive research or something, and you're just picking up a document that somebody wrote at some point, that's a whole different skill in and of itself. And most people, like scholars, will specialize in a certain period of classical Chinese. Like you can kind of read anything from any period, but to really get good at reading something like unannotated documents, you have to specialize. And even scholars will consult native speakers. Like even non-native speaking sinologists will consult native speakers on this stuff. They'll have like a trusted expert on classical Chinese that they'll consult. So, I mean, the body of literature available in classical Chinese is mind-boggling. There's just so much out there, and if you can read Confucian texts, that does not mean that you can pick up, a Buddhist sutra and understand it. They're completely different. Anytime I look at a Buddhist text, I'm completely lost. So, yeah, at some point you have to kind of specialize, but there is a sort of core for a learner. There's a sort of fairly well established path of like getting to the point that you can read whatever you need to read, and you're able to start specializing. There's like a few textbooks that I recommend going through that I cover in that video, and then after that, then yeah, you can definitely start specializing. How do I rate private Mandarin teaching academies? Sorry, I don't have any experience with that. So I don't think that's any. I've heard there's a few schools in Taipei, privately owned schools that, like Taiwan Mandarin Institute, and I guess LTL has a school in Taiwan now. They didn't when I was there. Um, I forget. I meant to look this up beforehand. I forget what it was called, Phoenix maybe, or there was some privately owned school that had really great reviews. So, like, I've heard good things about some of these schools, but I just don't have any personal experience with them. So, it's not something I can really comment on, unfortunately. Um, Ever considered learning Tibetan? Script looks cool. I actually thought about before I got into paleography. Um, well, before I decided whether I was going to do paleography or something else, the something else that I was thinking about was Manchu studies. I was really interested in the Qing dynasty and in Manchu itself, the language, and I was looking. There's a professor at Harvard, Mark Elliott, who works on that field. It's called the New Qing History, and they basically like there's a ton of archival documents that are written in both Chinese and Manchu, and what they've started to discover, if I remember correctly, is that a lot of times they differ. So the Manchu one will have details that the Chinese one skips out on, and so they're rewriting a lot of Qing history because of these Manchu documents that they've been researching. So um, yeah, that was the my other option, and actually it was because I met Ash, and he was studying paleography, and that was like I was trying to make up my mind which one I wanted to specialize in, and so talking to somebody who was in that field and knew a lot about it is what helped me make up my mind. So, um, but yeah, if I had gone to Harvard and studied under Professor Elliott, um, I've read their requirements for PhDs in that field, and you have to also learn Tibetan and I think Russian because there's a lot of research published in Russian related to that field. So yeah, I I was looking at it at one point. I think I have a few books on how to learn Manchu, but I never got into it seriously. Unfortunately, maybe I'll do it one day as just like a hobby project. Um, were there any Indians at MTC? Um, I don't remember. Probably. There were people from everywhere you could imagine that were there. I don't think I had any Indians in my classes. So when I was there, most of my classmates were Japanese. I would say probably 50% were Japanese and probably 20% were Korean and the rest were from all over. So I don't know if it's still the same. I've heard there are a lot fewer Japanese people at MTC now than there were when I was there. Um, there were also a lot of Thai people. There were several Vietnamese people in my classes. Um, in fact, I think there were so many, if I remember right, there were so many Thai people at MTC when I was there that they had, for the first few levels, they had classes specifically for Thai people, and they used textbooks that were written in Thai instead of in English. So, um, excuse me. Let's see. Considering MTC and was wondering how the experience may be for me and possibly if I'd be or feel out of place. I don't think so. I mean, it's a pretty international student body. Like I said, there's a big bulk of people that come from a few particular places, but overall, it's pretty international. So I wouldn't say I'd be surprised if anyone really felt out of place there. I'm trying to remember if there were any Indian. There were a decent number of Russians. Um, there could have been. I can't. There weren't any in my classes, but there could have been. There. Like I said, there were 2,000 people when I was there. So of course I don't know. I didn't know everybody at the school, not even close. I'd be surprised if there weren't Indians though. So okay, I think I've covered all the questions, even the ones from earlier in the broadcast. So and we're getting close to that 2 hour mark again. Yeah, I'm not. I keep saying I'm going to keep them down to about an hour, but I'm not sure I even have the ability to do that because I just tend to ramble. Um, okay, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wind up here. It's it's lunchtime here. It's after lunchtime, so I'm gonna go get some lunch. If you guys have any more questions, post them in the live chat. Will be over as soon as I hit the end button, but you can post them in the comments on the video, and feel free to share the video if you thought it was interesting. Post it to Facebook or wherever you do your social media stuff. Um, yeah, and like I said, next week I'm going to try to do Old and Middle Chinese with Ash. That should be fun. If he's not available, then we'll do something else. But um, let's see. I'm awesome. Thanks. Well, thanks for saying that. Let's see if I can get it to show up. There we go. Yeah, I've really enjoyed doing these, and I mentioned in the last two videos, I think, that we were considering doing like a subscription type thing. it's not going to be anytime soon. So we're going to keep doing these. I'm going to try to do them once a week, live. If we do end up doing a subscription thing, it'll be later on. So we'll announce it way beforehand. So, but for now, yeah, we're just going to keep doing them for free, and it's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. Definitely go watch the earlier ones. Yeah, do. I mean, they're long. I think the first two are an hour and a half, and then the last one about textbooks was 2 hours. So they're long, but you can probably put them on, play them a little faster than, like, put them on 1.5x or something. Hopefully I don't talk too fast for that to be doable. They're long, but there's tons of info, so I recommend checking it out. What time every week? So normally I do it. So I'm in Tokyo, so that kind of affects what time of day is doable for me. Normally I do them on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Tokyo time. This week it's Thursday my time. I had some stuff I had to do yesterday, so I couldn't make it on Wednesday. But usually I think it's going to be Wednesday at 1 p.m. If there's a lot of demand for a different time, I can change. I'm open to that. But right now, like 1 p.m. here is like evening in the US, which is where I think most of our audience is. So it's more doable. And it's also daytime for people who are in, Australia, New Zealand. It's maybe a little too early for Europe. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, if there's demand for me to do it at a different time, I'm flexible. But for now, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Tokyo time. All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, and I will see you guys next week.